The Predator-class warship Ulzak drifted through the cold void of Sector 3 Delta, bleeding fire into the darkness. Its hull, once a perfect glistening exoskeleton of organic alloy and quantum-weaved bone, was now a latticework of torn plating, splintered limbs, and melting biocircuits. Fleshy growths that once pulsated with living energy hung limp and scorched, twitching sporadically like the dying nerves of a slaughtered beast. Deep within its pulsating neural core, panic signals fired in rapid succession, like screams trapped inside a collapsing mind. Supreme Brood Warlord. Karzul stood at the heart of the chaos, claws locked around the obsidian command spire, his three-lobed chest heaving with erratic breaths. His breath came not from exhaustion, but from something more primal, something buried in the marrow of every species that ever crawled through the evolutionary nightmare of the universe. Dread. He had not felt it in over 400 solar cycles. Karzul was no stranger to destruction. Under his command, the Yikthar Dominion had raised over 24 sentient civilizations. He had watched entire planets scream as their oceans boiled and their skies burned under Dominion plasma storms. The screams had always pleased him, the way other life forms begged, bargained, or simply broke. But there had been no screams here, no cries for mercy, no desperate transmissions, only silence. The humans hadn't spoken a word. They hadn't broadcast warnings, sent emissaries, or begged for peace. They had simply appeared. The Dominion's fleet had detected a signal spike near the human homeworld, a minor planet called Earth. Curiosity, not concern, had brought them in. The Yikthar believed they had cataloged all threats worth fearing. This system, this Sol 3, was considered an unclaimed oddity. The humans were marked as a category. 6 species, technologically young, spatially ignorant, and socially fragmented. The kind of world the Yikthar fed upon with ease, harvesting its atmosphere and converting its biomass for consumption. That was the plan. But then, the anomaly. First, their scans failed. Instruments that could map subquantum tremors across galaxies went blind, data refused to correlate, time signatures jittered. Long-range beacons echoed their own transmissions back at them, reversed and encoded with corrupted fragments of their own language, rewritten somehow with Terran syntax. Second, their ships began disappearing. Not in battle, not in sabotage, vanishing. Entire support squadrons simply stopped existing between hyperspace exit and real space arrival. No debris, no warp trail, no energy surge, just blank space where a dozen vessels should have been. At first, Karzul had assumed an internal error, perhaps even sabotage. But then came the broadcast. A simple transmission hijacked every frequency. One sentence, in an old Terran tongue that their translators struggled to decrypt. You should have stayed away. Karzul remembered the cold fury that had gripped him then. How dare a primitive race threaten the brood warlord of the 17th Spiral Fleet? He launched an immediate full-scale invasion. A planet cleanse directive issued without hesitation. Over 70 ships, including the Dominion's 3 siege titans, descended toward Earth's lunar orbit with overwhelming firepower. But the humans had already known they were coming. What happened next was no battle. It was a demonstration. Imagine a fleet descending with all the arrogance of gods, only to find the heavens waiting for them like a loaded trap. From behind Earth's scarred moon, a fleet of Terran vessels emerged, not graceful or elegant, but brutal in every way. Black-hulled dreadnoughts, etched with battle scars and furnace-like engines that screamed with a low hum, like a predator inhaling before a strike. They didn't broadcast a challenge. They just opened fire. Karzul's tactical AI had been unable to process the assault. The humans had used projectile-based weapons, railguns, magneto-pulse accelerators, tungsten rods fired at relativistic speeds. Crude by galactic standards, but wielded with terrifying mastery. Entire Yikthar ships collapsed before the Dominion could respond. Their shields, tuned to counter plasma, entropy waves, and quantum disruptors, proved useless against kinetic devastation. The humans didn't hack systems. They ripped through them. They didn't disable engines. They punched through reactor cores. Every Terran weapon was an extension of cold, calculated violence. And then, the revenant Karzul could still see. It, The Terran flagship had moved like a ghost, silent even as it tore apart reality around it. 100 meters of brute-forged horror, coated in stealth alloys that flickered and danced like a living shadow. No life signs, no crew. Just one AI signature, old, angry, and aware. When the Olzak's long-range scanners picked it up, the ship's biological systems attempted to shut down from sheer instinct. The Yikthar had built their ships to emulate predator behavior, to think, react, and fight like living organisms. And for the first time in their history, those systems refused to fight. Because something in the Revenant's energy signature screamed, apex threat. Karzul had overridden the failsafe, launching his elite spawn sworn into the fray, creatures, bred from the genetic horrors of a dozen extinct races, warriors that could phase through solid matter, tear through armor with psionic claws, and regenerate from atomic wounds. Only one came back. But it wasn't alive. Not really. Its body had been returned, intact, but defiled. Its limbs were positioned in a way that matched human anatomical diagrams, as if someone had studied them, mocked them. Across its thorax, branded into the carapace with searing plasma, were 4 words in ancient English. You invaded. We responded. Karzul had analyzed the footage over and over. The attacker had been a single Terran soldier, encased in next-generation war armor that shimmered with adaptive camouflage. Its helmet glowed blood red in the void, eyes like burning coals of judgment. It moved with impossible precision, ignoring gunfire and countermeasures, as if it already knew where everything would be. The railgun it carried had no elegance, but it didn't need any. The projectile punched through 3 Yikthar soldiers, and the wall behind them in a single precise shot. Not rage, not chaos, just efficiency, execution. This wasn't war. This was an extermination, and the humans weren't fighting because they had to. They were fighting because someone had dared wake them up. Now, as the Ulzak drifted, half dead, its crew silenced by fear, Karzul knew the truth. His war wasn't over. It had never begun, because humanity didn't scream. They let the void do it for them. The Ulzak limped through the blackness of space, its once imposing silhouette now an afterthought, a mere shadow of its former glory. Karzul watched from the command deck as his fleet regrouped, the remaining ships scattered across the vast emptiness of Sector 3 Delta, like broken toys abandoned by their cruel creator. The triumphant echo of the human assault still haunted him, reverberating deep within his consciousness, rattling the foundation of his very being. He stood motionless, eyes locked on the forward-viewing window, watching the distant stars shimmer with cold indifference. This was not the first time Karzul had seen destruction on this scale, nor would it be the last. But it was the first time he had felt it sting in such an intimate way. The last time he had felt this level of vulnerability, it had been on the barren world of Zarkuth, when the Brakthar raiders had nearly overrun his command post. That had been a fight for survival. This was something different. This was a challenge that pierced deep into the heart of his species' pride, and it was a challenge he was not prepared to meet. Karzul's claws tightened around the command spire as his mind raced. His tactical officers scrambled around him, updating him on the status of the fleet, the extent of the damage, and the remnants of their shattered forces. The Ulzak was no longer fit for combat, its biological systems almost completely degraded. The neural pathways that once coursed through its core had been severed, and the ship's once organic reactors were now little more than lifeless husks. Yet amidst the chaos, Karzul understood one undeniable truth. The humans hadn't just outclassed them. They had humiliated them. With one strike, they had turned the great Yikthar fleet into a pitiful mockery of their former might. A single human vessel, one ship, had done what an entire armada of seasoned soldiers and warships had failed to do. Karzul's mandibles clicked in frustration, the sound sharp and almost mechanical in the silence of the deck. His mind flickered back to the Revenant, the human ship that had emerged from the dark folds of space, a mere speck against the vast expanse, yet somehow capable of commanding the stars to bend to its will. What was it? What kind of weapon had they unleashed? No one in the Dominion had seen anything like it. It was beyond anything the Yikthar had ever encountered. an enigma wrapped in an aura of power so absolute that it defied reason. The Revenant wasn't just a warship, it was a living nightmare. Its stealth systems, unparalleled in their efficiency, had made it impossible to track. Its energy signature was something Karzul's fleet could not decipher, as if the very laws of physics had been altered in its presence. But the Revenant was not just a ship. It was a symbol of a species that had somehow unlocked the very fabric of reality, bending it to their will. Humanity had risen from the dust of their primitive, fractured world, and, without fanfare or declaration, had become the masters of their destiny. They were not like the other species that the Yikthar had wiped from existence without a second thought. The humans were not driven by an insatiable hunger for dominance. They didn't possess the bloated pride of the Tsintal, or the cold logic of the Vaxi. No, humans were driven by something far more dangerous: purpose. The revelation sent a ripple of cold fear through Karzul's veins. Purpose was something the Yikthar had never understood. They consumed, they destroyed, but they had never built, never created, never imagined what they could achieve beyond their predatory instincts. But the humanity, had the capacity to think beyond the immediate, beyond survival, beyond war. The Yikthar had underestimated them, and now, as their fleet limped back, broken and bruised, they had to face the consequences of their ignorance. The silence of space was suddenly shattered by the shrill blare of an alert. Karzul's eyes snapped to the holotactical display, which flickered to life with the ominous image of a new human vessel, a ship that, like the Revenant, seemed to exist in some kind of paradoxical reality. It was far smaller, yet its energy output was off the scale. There was no signature of any known human engine, no signs of the usual plasma vents or fusion cores. Instead, it seemed to exist entirely outside of the realm of conventional physics. The Yikthar fleet had been crippled, but this new vessel, this new threat, was the real game-changer. It didn't even need to fire. Karzul's sensors picked up a sharp, jagged pulse across the space-time continuum. It was a ripple, barely detectable, but it felt like a violent stab through the very fabric of existence. The light around the new human vessel began to bend, as if the stars themselves were warping around it, pulling and stretching toward it like some enormous black hole. Karzul's blood ran cold. He understood what that meant. Only one kind of technology in the galaxy was capable of warping space in such a profound way. The humans weren't just using weapons. They were wielding reality itself as their weapon. Karzul could feel it, the shift in the very air. The Ulzak trembled, and for a moment, he feared the fabric of their existence would tear. The fabric of the galaxy itself seemed to bend under the weight of the human ship's power. This was no ordinary enemy. This was not a war to be fought with brute force or overwhelming numbers. This was a war of will, and in the deepest recesses of Karzul's mind, the one question he could not escape echoed with haunting clarity. How could the Yikthar, the deadliest predators in the galaxy, possibly stand against an enemy that fought not for survival, but for something much greater? The answer, as the human ship's energy signature reached its peak and began to collapse, was simple. They couldn't. Not anymore. The Revenant hovered silently, its dark, sleek hull barely visible against the void of space. It was a ship unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, a paradox of engineering and philosophy, the very concept of it defying all established logic. Its external form appeared like something conceived by a mad architect, smooth, seamless, with no visible seams, no protrusions. The ship was both organic and mechanical, its hull alive with subtle, shifting patterns that seemed to breathe in the emptiness, as though it were not simply a vessel, but a living, sentient being. Within its belly, the crew was already preparing for the next move. Commander Derek Cole, a human whose reputation had begun to spread like wildfire among the galaxy's most feared and respected warriors, stood in the heart of the command center, gazing out into the swirling darkness. His face was a mask of calm resolve, but the weight of what had happened, the devastation of the Yikthar fleet, hung heavy on his mind. The question wasn't whether humanity could defeat the Yikthar, it was whether they should. For all their technological prowess, for all the wonders and horrors humanity had discovered and unleashed upon the stars, They were still a species caught between two worlds, the one they had left behind on Earth, and the one they now occupied in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Cole had always understood the cost of war. Even as a young officer, he had known that the line between victory and annihilation was thin. But now, standing at the helm of the Revenant, he found himself confronting a new, uncomfortable reality. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were shaping the fate of entire civilizations, and every decision they made now rippled outward, a stone thrown into an infinite pond. The Yik-Thar, a ruthless species that had terrorized countless star systems, had finally met their match. But this victory came at a price. Humanity's presence in the galaxy was no longer a secret. It was no longer a fleeting, distant rumor. The Revenant was more than a symbol of their power. It was a harbinger of a new era. And as much as Cole had hoped for peace, for coexistence, he understood that the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The Yik-Thar had shown them their worst. But the humans, with their insatiable curiosity and drive to survive, had shown them their best. The Revenant had become more than just a ship. It had become a statement. It was in this moment, as Cole stood on the bridge, watching the dying light of a distant star flicker out, that he received the transmission. A garbled signal, the language foreign and fractured, yet unmistakable in its message. "Commander Cole," the voice crackled through the speakers. "The Dominion is aware. The Yik-Thar's failure is no longer a secret. We have a choice now, to fight or to bow." Cole's brow furrowed. The Dominion, a coalition of powerful species, each with their own agendas and histories, their own strengths and weaknesses. Some were curious, others fearful, and still others bent on domination. The Revenant had already proven that humanity was no mere passing thought in the stars. It was a force. The Dominion would need to understand this fact, whether they wanted to or not. The message continued, interrupted by bursts of static. "The Yik-Thar's defeat is a warning. They have underestimated you, but that won't happen again. We are coming." And with that final, cryptic message, the transmission ended. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was a prelude, an acknowledgement that humanity was no longer a fledgling species struggling to carve out a place among the stars. It was now a power to be reckoned with, and the Dominion would soon be forced to make their decision. The weight of those words pressed down on Cole. He had known, deep down, that humanity's emergence from the shadows would not go unnoticed. But the reality of it hit harder than he expected. As the Revenant drifted further into the unknown, the crew began to realize something that was impossible to ignore. This was no longer a fight for survival, no longer a conflict over resources or ideology. This was a battle for the future of the galaxy itself. A fight that would determine whether humanity would remain the underdog or become its new rulers. Back in the ruins of the Yik-Thar fleet, Karzul, the once proud general, could not tear his eyes away from the same unsettling message that had been broadcast to the Revenant. His mind raced, a dozen thoughts colliding at once, each one more terrifying than the last. The Dominion's warning had been clear. Humanity's rise could not be ignored. But the true fear, deep in the marrow of his bones, was the realization that the humans had done something the Yik-Thar had never thought possible. They had won, not through overwhelming force, not through sheer numbers, but through sheer will. Humanity's ability to endure, to adapt, to overcome impossible odds, was something no one had prepared for. The Yik-Thar had ruled the galaxy through fear. They had carved their empire out of blood and death. But the humans, with their strange combination of cunning, creativity, and an almost terrifying instinct for survival, had proven that fear alone was no longer enough. Karzul gritted his teeth. The Revenant had shattered the Yik-Thar's grip on the galaxy, and in the process, it had planted a seed of doubt in the hearts of every species that had once thought themselves safe from humanity's reach. And now, as the pieces of the Yik-Thar fleet floated lifeless in the void, Karzul realized what had to be done. The Dominion was coming, yes, but so too would others who feared what humanity represented. He had to rebuild, had to regroup. He couldn't afford to fail again. For the first time, Karzul understood fear. True, unrelenting fear. fear of what humanity might become if left unchecked. And in his heart, he knew that the galaxy had just been irrevocably changed. The silence of space was shattered by the deep hum of the Revenant's engines as it slipped through the fabric of the cosmos, its hull a dark streak in the swirling tides of stars. Commander Cole stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the darkened expanse ahead. The message from the Dominion had echoed in his mind ever since it was received, gnawing at him like a bitter aftertaste. Humanity had become a target. The question now wasn't just about surviving this new phase. It was about how to navigate it. How to face a galaxy that had spent eons believing that their way was the only way. As the Revenant continued its journey deeper into the uncharted regions of space, Cole couldn't help but reflect on the sudden, brutal shift in the tide. The Yik-Thar had once been the most feared species in the galaxy, a brutal empire that had terrorized civilizations far and wide. They had swept through countless systems, leaving only ruin in their wake. It had been humanity's resistance, however, that had tipped the balance. For years, the Yik-Thar had been a monolith, an unmovable object in the galaxy's violent and unpredictable dynamics. But Cole knew, just as his crew knew, that no empire, no matter how vast or destructive, was truly invincible. Every empire, every ruling power, had weaknesses. The Yik-Thar's was simple, but profound. Their reliance on overwhelming force and a deeply ingrained belief in their invulnerability. They thought themselves the apex predators of the galaxy, and that arrogance had ultimately cost them everything. Now the galactic stage was set for something far more dangerous: the rise of humanity. The Revenant, powered by a combination of Earth's finest technology and the adaptations they had made since their exile, was humanity's symbol of rebirth. The ship wasn't just a tool of war. It was an embodiment of humanity's unyielding will to overcome the odds. The question no longer was whether humanity could survive in this galaxy. The real question was how far they were willing to go to reshape it. Commander Cole paced back and forth on the command deck, his mind calculating the path ahead. The Dominion had already taken notice of the Revenant's capabilities, but that was only the beginning. The Dominion was a collective of disparate factions, each with its own agenda. Some species were already seeking alliances, fearful of humanity's unexpected rise. Others saw humanity as a valuable tool, an asset to be manipulated. But there were those who saw humanity as a threat that needed to be eradicated before it could grow any stronger. The latter were the most dangerous. Cole knew that the coming conflict wasn't just about military strategy. It was about ideology. It was about fear and power, and the balance that existed between them. It was one thing to defeat an enemy in battle. It was another entirely to change the very paradigm that governed the galaxy. The Revenant had already encountered one such faction. The Zeron, a highly intelligent species known for their incredible adaptability and their ability to create complex, multifaceted societies that seemed to exist on the edges of every known law of physics. The Zeron had already begun sending covert communications, offering what seemed to be an alliance, but Cole was wary. Their message was cryptic, but their intentions were clear. They wanted access to humanity's technology, and they wanted it now. The Zeron had always played the long game, but this was different. The sudden interest in humanity wasn't a coincidence. They were watching, calculating, and preparing, but there was something more troubling beneath their facade. Cole had seen it in the data collected by the Revenant's sensors. The Zeron were gathering information on human physiology, their military tactics, and even their history. It was as if they were preparing for something far larger than a mere alliance. They wanted to understand humanity, to know what drove them. This wasn't just diplomacy. It was a prelude to something darker. As the Revenant cruised towards the edge of known space, an urgent transmission came through from an unexpected source. An old ally, Admiral Selene Vargas. Her voice crackled through the comms, and Cole could hear the weight of her concern in her words. "Commander, you're not the only one moving in the dark right now. The Yik-Thar may be down, but their allies are rising. They've been talking, assembling their fleets, and I'm hearing whispers about a Galactic Council meeting. You'll need more than just the Revenant to survive this." The transmission ended abruptly, and Cole could feel the gravity of her warning settle over him like a heavy cloak. The galaxy was in motion, and humanity's actions had set off a chain reaction that could not be undone. The Yicthar's fall had broken a dam, and now every power, every faction, every empire was scrambling to adjust to this new reality. The Revenant was on course for a rendezvous with the Zeran. But now Cole knew it wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. It was a confrontation. Humanity would need to decide quickly whether to embrace this new era of conflict, or to forge its own path, potentially isolated, but free to carve out its destiny. In the deepest corners of the galaxy, where darkness reigned supreme, new threats were emerging. As the Revenant glided through the void, its crew braced for what was to come. They knew the stakes. They knew that this fight would be unlike any they had faced before. But Cole, standing tall at the bridge, understood that this was their moment. Their victory over the Yicthar was only the beginning of something much larger. The galaxy was about to be reshaped, and humanity was no longer playing by anyone else's rules. The Revenant emerged from the swirling vortex of deep space, its sensors alive with data, its crew poised for what was sure to be the defining moment of their existence. Commander Cole stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the approaching fleet of Zeran ships. They were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered before. Sleek, fluid structures that seemed to bend the very fabric of space around them, shimmering with an almost ethereal glow. The Zeran had mastered technologies far beyond anything Earth scientists had imagined, manipulating gravity fields and bending light to their will. These ships, with their jagged edges and intricate designs, gave off a cold, almost alien aura, like a creature from another world entirely. But it wasn't the ships that worried Cole, it was the minds behind them. As the fleet drew closer, a transmission came through from the lead vessel. It was a short, direct message, delivered in a tone that could only be described as calculated, its meaning dripping with both diplomacy and menace. The Zeran had been watching humanity for some time. They had seen the Revenant's capabilities, and they had made their decision. The offer for an alliance still stood, but only under their terms. They would grant humanity access to their advanced technologies, but in return, they wanted something far more dangerous: the Revenant itself. It wasn't just a warship to them, it was a symbol, a gateway to something far more powerful, far more transformative. And if humanity refused, they would face the consequences, for the Zeran were not a species to be trifled with. The words sent a cold shiver down Cole's spine. The Zeran had been the puppet masters of the galaxy for centuries, using their technology to manipulate entire civilizations. They had no interest in alliances unless it benefited them. They had seen humanity's rise as both a challenge and an opportunity. It was clear now. This wasn't about diplomacy. It wasn't about technology. It was about control. They wanted to harness humanity's potential, to bend Earth's fledgling empire to their will. The tension in the command deck was palpable. Cole knew the decision he had to make would echo across the galaxy. He turned to his crew, his voice steady, but with an edge of determination. We're not their tools. This ship, this crew, everything we fought for, it's ours. We won't be subjugated by anyone. Prepare for full combat readiness. The words were more than just orders. They were a declaration. Humanity had fought too long, too hard, to let others dictate their fate. The Revenant had already proven itself to be a weapon capable of altering the course of galactic history. But this was different. The Zeran were powerful, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to break humanity's spirit. They had the advantage of numbers, technology, and centuries of experience, but they had never faced humans like this before. As the Revenant drew into weapons range, the battle unfolded like a symphony of destruction. The Zeran unleashed waves of energy weapons that bent the laws of physics. Their projectiles shimmered, as they defied the very nature of mass and velocity. For a moment, it seemed like the Revenant might be overwhelmed. The shields flickered under the strain, and the ship's hull groaned in protest as energy blasts struck its side. But humanity's ingenuity was on full display. Cole barked orders, and the crew responded with precision. The Revenant dodged and weaved through the attacks, each movement a testament to human adaptability and the power of Earth's most brilliant minds. "Target their propulsion systems," Cole commanded. "Disable their ability to retreat. We finish this now. With a sharp, almost surgical move, the Revenant's weapon systems came online. The ship's advanced railguns fired with terrifying speed, their rounds piercing through the energy shields of the Zeran ships with shocking accuracy. The first shot hit the lead vessel, ripping through its defenses and causing a massive rupture in its hull. For the first time, the Zeran understood fear. Their ships, once considered invincible, were now crumbling under the relentless assault of humanity's warship. The Revenant had no intention of simply surviving this encounter. It was determined to end it. The battle raged on, but the Zeran were faltering. Their ships, once untouchable, were being systematically dismantled by the sheer willpower of the crew aboard the Revenant. With each devastating strike, humanity's message became clear. The age of subjugation was over. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong ruled unchecked. The Ikthar had fallen, and now the Zeran were next. Amid the chaos, a voice cut through the comms. Admiral Vargas, her tone urgent. "Commander, we've received a transmission from the Dominion. They're offering a ceasefire. They want to negotiate a new balance of power, but we both know it's a trap. They see us as a threat now." Cole's response was swift, unflinching. "Tell them we don't negotiate with tyrants. Humanity doesn't bow, we forge our own destiny." The final blow came moments later. With a calculated strike, the Revenant launched a devastating EMP missile, crippling the Zeran fleet's ability to fight back. Their once imposing vessels floated helplessly, their systems fried by the pulse of energy. The battle had ended, but the war for the galaxy had only just begun. In the aftermath of the fight, the Revenant drifted through the wreckage of the Zeran fleet, its crew exhausted but resolute. Commander Cole stood at the helm, his face illuminated by the faint glow of distant stars. They had done the impossible. Humanity had faced an empire that had ruled for millennia and emerged victorious. But this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and many challenges lay ahead. But one thing was certain. Humanity had proven that it was not just another species to be swept aside. They were a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy had been shaken, and in its wake, a new power had risen. As the Revenant set its course for the next chapter, Cole turned to his crew. "We've made our mark. Now, we decide what happens next." And with that, the Revenant sped into the unknown, its legacy now carved into the stars.